各位方濟家庭嘅兄弟姊妹們，午安。Good afternoon to our Franciscan sisters and brothers. So we will begin our session with a prayer. 我哋會以一個祈禱嚟開始我哋今日嘅聚會。因父及子及聖神之名，阿們。我哋一齊誦念。新印五章的聖方濟，你是被釘耶穌的肖像，世界渴望你，需要你向天主及他人開放的心靈，需要你受傷的腳走遍天下，需要你高舉被刺透的雙手向天主祈求。世人聽到你微弱而且有福音潛力的聲音，聖方濟，請幫助現代的人認清罪惡的醜陋，痛改前非，悔過自新。聖方濟，請為我們祈禱，因父及子及聖神之名，阿們。好，歡迎大家嚟到維納大廈。English, okay. Welcome to the Lavender building. So the purpose of this building is to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ from the top hill that Jardine looked out, but now we are here inside the city with the poor people around us. And we have many floors in this building. So the ground floor, we have some books for sale, those about Bible and those about our Franciscan spirituality. And the first and the second floor that we are here now is conference room, that we can have gathering, we have sharing, we have some spirituality meetings here. And also on the second floor, we have rent part of it to Caritas. And the third floor is to the Catholic Bible Institute. And then CMAC. Sorry, third floor is CMAC, the Catholic Marriage Advisory Council. So the Catholic Bible Institute is on the 6th floor. And the 5th floor, we say, is a big prayer room. You can go there to pray with the presence of us friars. And you can see there are many things that are from the Jardine lookout. The glass of the four gospel images and also the tabernacle. And then from 7, 8, 9th floor, we say is the part of the reading rooms. The 7th floor, you are most welcome to go there to read books. We have the staff there to welcome you. And on the 8th and the 9th floor, we say is some kind like an archive. It contains the old books, both in Chinese and in foreign languages. And then on the 10th and 11th floor is kind of a gallery, and also the place for Blessed Allegra with his relics there. That's it. So this is our building. So welcome very much to this Lavender building. And today with us we have Brother Raymond. You see he's our manager. We manage many things here. And then we have Brother William with us. He's our translator. And I would like to also acknowledge the Franciscan sister. We have Chen Shaolui, Sister Teresa, FMM here. And then we have also MNDA, Sister Helen. Sister Helen. Okay, welcome so much. And then we have four sisters. Oh, okay. Okay, Sister Frances. Okay, Sister Maria, Claire Maria. Okay, Sister Lucy, of course, and then Sister Martha. Okay, we give them. And then And then we have Father Roland with us. Okay. And of course we have Brother Michael with us. He came from America, the central west part of the America. So from year 2013 to 21, and he was our general minister of the OFM, and is the 120th successor of St. Francis of Assisi. And now he is an in-house Franciscan scholar and director for the Center for Integral Ecology in New York Siena College. And he is also the president of the board of Franciscan International. So now we give our time to Brother Michael for the sharing to us.
Let's test and see. Can everyone hear me on the microphone? So I won't use this one. I'll put this one on so we don't get any feedback. So good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to rearrange the slides so we go back to the original. So, it's strange, why would I begin with the celebration 2009, but 1209 with what's called the primitive rule? Because it's very important to keep in mind, if we're going to think about celebrations, we need to be all-inclusive. And because the primitive rule that we know nothing about, except that it somehow, something was approved, Francis scribbled some things on a piece of paper maybe, or but I'm sure he didn't scribble them. He took a lot of time with his brothers and wrote a few ideas down, and then went to talk to the Pope, waited quite some time, according to Celano, to get to see the Pope in order to present his ideas. From the perspective of the Pope, it was just probably in Vatican, it was just one more crazy group of, in this case, men. There were women groups as well, but men's groups who were presenting some apostolic radical idea about gospel living that was seen by many as threatening and by others as spiritually needed in the church. So Francis did not go into a receptive audience at first. And in fact, the audience was anything but receptive. But being smart, being very intelligent, he knew how to negotiate. He got his negotiators to work for him. He made friends with some of the cardinals, as we know. The names, several of them are repeated or brought up in the context of the rule or in the testament. So, and in Celano and the other biographers. So it's important to keep in mind his friends as well. Anyone from this culture knows how important contacts are and friendships. If you're going to go anywhere, you have to have contacts, no matter what. Otherwise, you can be the smartest, you can have the best product, but if you don't have those contacts, it will not matter. And it wasn't any different in Francis's time in central part of Italy, where there was an emerging merchant class. He was part of that, so it was all about negotiating. Having said that, today the idea is for us to look at these anniversaries and to raise some questions about what they mean to us today. I think that's what Brother William asked me to do with you. So we're going to look at, not really look too closely at the primitive rules, since we don't even know what it looks like. We've got only notions of what it could have looked like from several other rules. That's why we need to look at them. But before we jump into the second and third and fourth iterations of rules, something else we celebrated in 2019, and that was Damietta. That is a significant event for the life of the order. Then we have the Memoriale Propositi. Secular Franciscans will understand that. Although I feel sorry, in a sense, you've gone through so many iterations of rules, you could teach us something about how rules are written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten, more than what we had in the first order. We'll look briefly at the regular Volata that we're celebrating this year. We'll look at Greccio, the experience of Greccio, which is actually speak there, and then the Christmas time, then the Stigmata next year, and we'll look at the Canticle of the Creatures, 2025, although we need to keep in mind there were three parts to the canticle. The first part begun probably who knows when in Francis's mind, his imagination, years before, but culminating in some first text. And not a text only, it's a sung. The one thing we need to understand about Francis is anything written was written in order to be performed. It wasn't written to be read. It was written to put into a theatrical performance in a sense, but I'll explain that at present. Canticle of the Creatures, and in 2025, that also connects with 10 years of the celebration of Laudato Si Pope Francis, which was his reading and making contemporary the meaning of the Canticle of the Creatures for the world today. And then we'll look briefly at the death of St. Francis, which we will celebrate in 2026. So that's kind of the outline of what we're going to look at. So I've put some images here. One of them is kind of reversed, but that's it. So in the order, the primitive rule, 1209, and whatever might have taken place from 1205, 1206 until 1209, whatever Francis would have written down or thought about with his brothers, the first brothers, the experience of Damietta, we know that that was not just a trip, a short trip. Francis could have been there anywhere from 6 to 9 months and probably included a visit for some time in Syria. Now, if you go to the custody of the Holy Land, the brothers will insist that Francis slept there. And if you include Syria in the Holy Land, or Damietta in the experience of the custody of the Holy Land, you can say yes. Did he make it to Jerusalem? There's no indication. No one talks about his visit. Probably not, although he really wanted to go. Then the Memoriale Propositi for the Order of Franciscan Seculars, the Regula Nobilata, the Regula Bullata, La Verna, Greccio, Canticle, and Porziunculo. I don't want to repeat simply, but there are images we're going to see as we go along, and these images help us understand, I think, something. So, all of us received a letter recently. We received a letter from our Minister Generals or President of the Conference of Franciscan Families, the CFF. In the first part, it says we want to invite you to reflect together on the various anniversaries, the various commemorations that are coming up, beginning this year and next year through 2026. They talk about two things, what the importance of that is. One is to take us back on intellectually and spiritually to do a journey. To go back and understand what things meant then, what was its significance then, and then what is its prophetic importance for today. What does it tell us about today and how we are to conduct ourselves? So there is obviously some opportunity. Then it goes into Francis's whole life was one of just letting go, being willing to entrust everything into God's hands and giving everything back to God through a process of conversion. He said, because the only one who keeps nothing for himself but gives all of himself is able to walk in fraternity, guided by a desire for the supreme good. So there's an element of freedom that comes in here, the dimension of liberation. The first part really takes us into covenant with God, the second part into liberation, and then referring to everything, God is all good, almighty good. Last Sunday I gave a talk on the role of the sacred scriptures in Laudato Si. And I told you something about Tov Meod, something which is good, which is very good. This is reflected in Francis's prayers as well, his hearing of those early texts from Genesis in the liturgical celebration, so that his vision progressively came to see everything as fundamentally good, which is one of those key elements of Franciscan humanism, if you will, for the world, Franciscan vision toward the world. When we look out, we do not see bad, we see good. What we see as bad is only something which needs to be transformed into good. It's not something bad which stays bad. And that's one thing. There's a positive anthropology behind Franciscan vision, Franciscan approach to the world. And that's very important to keep in mind, I think, particularly in different struggles that take place in our own personal lives, but not only that, in our relationship, in our fraternities, and also our relationship with the broader world. So we need to keep that in mind, I think. So we've got to go back and understand here, there's something biblical about Francis's imagination. That's why we started last Sunday with a biblical reflection on Laudato Si, because as I mentioned then, Francis's world was a biblical world. He memorized, he imbibed the text, and that's why when he talks about the gospel, it's the text, but it's also the living God who's standing behind the text. It's the God who creates, it's the God who saves, liberates, it's the God who continually walks with God's people along the way, who maintains covenant with us. And so these dimensions, the different, let's take a look at those just for a moment, because I think Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5 help us perhaps understand Francis's understanding of memory. What is memory about? To remember. It's not just about something in the past. Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Elohim. Someone else who speaks Hebrew better than me can continue. Thank you. Our God, Adonai, is one, and you are to love Adonai, your God, with all your heart, all your being, and all your resources. You read the prayers of Francis, this is what's being said over and over again. This prayer is being sung behind those prayers of Francis. I order you to put them in your heart. Teach them to your children. So remember together. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you are traveling on the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Another image that comes to mind is the image of Jesus who meets the two disciples on the road to Emmaus in Luke's Gospel. It is this being redrawn. And I didn't look at the scripture reference to see, but my imagination tells me that is what's playing behind that encounter with Jesus and the two disciples, that is a way of life, which says something about Jesus when Francis talks about gospel way of life. It's important to keep in mind. Tie them on your hand as a sign, put them in the front of your headband around your forehead. Write them on the door frames of your house and on your gates. Very interesting. If you ever get a chance to visit the family at Roland or the friars in Poland, when you walk into the bedroom of somebody, one of the friaries in their house, you're going to see something written above that. Can you just say a word about that? What's written above?
I don't think it's in my province.
Okay, so
maybe it's the province, but maybe they may have some particular.
Do you know what the meaning is?
Zakon?
Yeah. No, the meaning of when they write it on the. So, if I recall correctly, the friars in one or several provinces in Poland write above the doorposts, and it changes each year. They write reconsecrating that space to God. It's a dedication. And that's what they do, which was what the Jews were called to do when in Exodus something was going to happen to Pharaoh, the families of Pharaohs. God was going to send the curse. What were they supposed to do? Okay, now you remember.
Because during the period of Christmas, is our Polish tradition that every house is visited by a priest. So in our convents as well, every cell, every place within the convent is visited and blessed. And those letters C, M, B, and the coming year usually stand for the three kings.
The three kings. And I think behind the tradition of three kings is this blessing that takes place, this protection that comes, we are to put in. So we're to dedicate everything to God. That's what I think is behind. So let's talk just for a moment, what is going on in the scriptures? What takes place in that Shema? What is Shema talking about? It's talking about the Exodus, about liberation in the scriptures. God frees the people and leads them to freedom, a land of freedom. They get along some point, Moses, Sinai. We know there's a covenant formed, a promise made. God has freed people in order to enter into a new relationship with God's people. If you read before that, you know there's a lot of failures on the part of human beings. God sets a covenant, we fail. God sets a covenant, we fail. This is a new covenant with Sinai. So they've established again the friendship, if you will. And then it's projected toward the future. There's a promise toward which we are walking. It's not over yet. No matter how good it is, it's not over. There's something else waiting. for us in the future. And that is this sense of promise, prophecy, if you will. And it has to do with our identity. When we tell these stories together, we are shaping an identity together. We're shaping a sense that we are in this together. What do you do when you meet in your local fraternities as Franciscans? We tell stories, Francis stories, Jesus stories, our stories, when we do it in our communities, Franciscan communities, when we do it in our friaries. We are shaping and reminding ourselves of our collective identity. We belong to God, we belong to one another. And so there's a sense of building fraternity. This is that word, importance of the word fraternity. But fraternity has another purpose. We build that fraternity because we recognize also we have responsibility. God brings us, frees us. God creates this relationship of love in order that we might live the story of God in our midst with other people. And that leads us to prophetic living, living with gospel-inspired values that shape our lives and contribute to the world. There's a dimension of justice. I know we're not supposed to use that word now. They're using it integral ecology. Well, let's call it integral ecology. But however we want to shape that, it is God's justice. It's not our justice. It's God, how God imagines our relationships should be with one another, with all creation. And then what does that mean? It leads us to greater communion, fraternity with all of creation, all that God has made. And so, liberation. Francis encounters the leper. That was an act of liberation for Francis. He was set free from many things in his life so that he could embrace a new vision. And I included something that had Pope Francis in there because you might recall Pope Francis, one of his audiences, or I think it was the celebration of the Mass, there was someone whose figure, an Italian man whose figure is, he's in his 50s, but completely transfigured or changed by a disease. Some would say he suffers tremendously from being pushed out by people because of the shape of his face. You might recall seeing some of those pictures on TV. And it's a similar thing. This person equates the leper today with the leper of the time of Francis. The covenant. What took place when Francis goes to San Damiano? Jesus makes a covenant with Francis. It's going to covenant that's going to be renewed different times. The San Damiano needs to be understood. That's not the act of liberation. It was the covenant that Francis and Jesus made with Francis. Francis agreed to enter into. And then one of the events we're celebrating is this encounter between Francis and the Sultan, which means Francis goes beyond the limits of who was included in God's love. Francis enters into this world of Islam and recognizes that perhaps God has some mysterious plan for the people of Islam, the Muslims as well. And so there's embrace that takes place, prophetic justice, living, allowing God to do whatever God should choose to do and reshape our relationship. Remember that took place in the context of a war that was taking place, the Fifth Crusade. Francis walked into, in the middle of, and walked away with a very different perspective. And then the communion of all that is leading. So liberation, covenant, liberation leads to the possibility of a new relationship with God. The covenant relationship leads to new responsibilities that we have toward other people. And when we live out that prophetic living, that justice, we discover a new communion with other people and with the entire world. Let me pause for a moment. Are you with me so far? I know my English is poor, but I hope that I'm clear speaking. Okay. So, liberation. The Lord gave me brothers. When I was in sin, it seemed very bitter for me to see lepers, and the Lord himself led me among them, and I had mercy upon them. And when I left them, that which seemed bitter to me was changed into sweetness of soul and body, and afterwards I lingered a little and left the world. Left the world. What world did Francis leave? Did he take a plane somewhere or something, or just leave? Or anybody? What world did Francis leave? Anybody have an idea? Lucy, anybody? What world did Francis leave? Huh? So he left a world that would have had him in a class that would have kept him from the poor, would have kept him from being open to people. He lived in a world where they had two monies. You probably understand they had two monetary systems. They had the cheap money, or the light money, and the heavy money. The heavy money was if you were wealthy, you had access to the heavy money. What was the heavy money? It had more silver in it. And if you were excluded from that group, then you had the cheap money, which had more junk metal and just a little bit, progressively less and less silver. So that you would go to work under whoever it was, and today you get paid 30 coins. Then there's a war, there's a change of government, something happens. Those get melted down, and they get cheaper, they get lighter. But you're still given the same size. They almost look the same, except they have about half the value. It's called devaluation, which was the time of devaluation of St. Francis' time. They had devaluation back then too. It was sometimes produced by popes or by kings, because the Pope came in, the new Pope came in, depending on what part he controlled of Italy, then that part got new coins with that, his name, his face on it, and the same effect took place, lighter, heavier coins. Francis left that economic system. He said it's unjust. He said no matter how hard people work, they will only get poor because the system is set up against them and for the rich. So that's what Francis left. He left the choice of power. He could have become probably eventually some power broker in Assisi eventually, as that merchant class became more powerful. He left that. And what's interesting is, he did with the brothers, every time that they were, if you've been to Assisi or if you looked at a map of Assisi, you'll notice that there are multiple different walls within Assisi. It's like you got belt number 1, and you get a little heavier, and you get belt number 2, you get a little fatter, and you get belt number 3, you get a little fatter, and you get belt number 4. But somehow they didn't take away those belts. If you go to Assisi, they've got the old gate, they got the less than old gate, they got the somewhat newer gate, they got the new gate, and they got the really new gate. So you got all those different gates that you go through with different names. Every time they built those walls, it was usually to keep the rich in and push the poor out. And Francis insisted with the brothers that they move out each time, but that happened, keep moving. The brothers and the Order of Penitents. Who were the Order of Penitents? Who were the Order of Penitents? Became the Order of Francis Executors. That's who you were, the Order of Penitents, that along with the Order of Penitents, Friars Minor. There's a little separation there. I think it's important. So we've got Francis being liberated. What are other acts of liberation today? Because again, the celebration of liberation can't just simply stay in Francis's time. So I took a couple different images. One is from India, the first one there, that we deliver hope. That, you can barely read it there, but that's a friars working together to deliver hope. The next one is obviously Franciscan sisters working to deliver hope. The next one is secular Franciscans. That's the second one, is also from Asia. I think it's from Myanmar. The third is from the United States. These are secular Franciscans who are delivering hope to people who are in need. And the fourth, very different type of hope to be delivered. Franciscans International, carrying the message of Franciscan family and the values of St. Francis to the United Nations and to the big power brokers, and saying we must respect human rights, the dignity of people, their freedoms. And so that's an important part of an act of liberation today. That's Francis embracing the leper in a different level, an important level than Francis. By the way, remember, Francis got into some of the business of what was taking place in Assisi. We're going to read it later on. We'll get to it later on, but to keep in mind the conflict between the mayor and the bishop. You remember the story. It's not so different than going to the United Nations, except they did it. We'll explain that briefly. So, the first thing we must do is we're called to remember our identity. And so we've got the image here of the Pope and Francis there. That goes back again to 1209. That's the image of 1209, but it also could be fast forwarded to 1223, if you will, the approval, the final approval of the regular Bulata that we're celebrating this year. We'll celebrate on the 29th of November for the First Order. And so that is the sign of covenant. And in Francis' own words, in the regular no Bulata, it says, let us all love the Lord our God, who has given and gives to each of us our whole body and our soul and our whole life. It's a reference to Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 5. Those are, Francis, when he's thinking, he's got this biblical mindset that goes on. Who has created, redeemed, and will save us by his mercy alone. What is mercy? What religion talks about mercy alone constantly? Islam. And so this is probably some influence of Francis in Damietta. He recognized that people see God as merciful, who did and does everything good for us. Good. Lowv. It's going back to the Genesis. Therefore, let us desire nothing else. Let us not want anything else. Let us nothing else please us or cause us delight except our Creator, Redeemer, and Savior, the only true God, who is full of goodness, lowv, of true and supreme good. This is the text. This is the covenant text that we have in writing from Francis. Now, because we're here and you're here, and you're more numerous than the rest of us, the Order of Franciscan Seculars, I thought maybe we could go back just for a moment, go back to 2021, because that was an important date for you. I was a certain number of times with your Minister General, Tibor. We talked about different things, including the Memoriale Propositi. If you have seen, watch it again. If you have not seen, go on the website of the Order and watch those five short videos that talk about that. It's worth seeing that again. I looked at those again last week just to remind myself of what the principal values are today that emerge from the rule that you received originally at 1221 from Francis. Again, we'll go through and talk about all the changes, or won't, but anyway. The rule of life of the secular Franciscans is what? Observe the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. So this is that Shema Israel. Follow the example of Francis of Assisi, who made God the center of his life. And then the secular Franciscans devote themselves to careful reading of the gospel, going from gospel to and life back to gospel. So we can't leave it on the pages. We've got to bring it into our daily lives. I don't know how you run your meetings. I hope they're not meetings. I hope they're fraternal moments of deep sharing. That should go for all of us, the friars minor as well, when we get together in chapter. Should be moments where we are stopping for a minute and looking at God who has liberated us. And when we look at God who's liberated and brought us into covenant relationship with God, what conditions of covenant exist between us and God? And then who then calls us, invites us to act justly, walk humbly, be united with God, which is a reference to Micah 6, which is also a text that appears in writings of St. Francis. So this Memoriale Propositi, it's a way of gospel life, the covenant that we make. It's modeled on Jesus, on the gospel. Jesus is the gospel. He's the living gospel. So it's got to do with our relationship, not only reading the scripture text, but our being in relationship with Jesus. Who is Jesus in our lives? Who is Jesus for our fraternities? And what does Jesus lead us as brothers and sisters in our fraternities to become and to do? And then there are the six values that are in your renewal that was called for in 2021. Fraternity, simplicity of life, family, reconciliation, prayer, and peace. So we'll say a word about each of those. One of the greatest struggles, I was at your chapter, the previous chapter, where Tibor was reelected, and it was very, very interesting experience for me to be there for a few days. I went for a couple of days. I didn't want to stop in, say hello, and they asked me to say a few words. So, but one of the things that Tibor and that your presidency talks about so often is as happens in some fraternities around the world, professed community fraternities, they become monthly devotional meetings. We say a few prayers. There's not much life exchanged. People look like they're tired, become tired, they act tired while they're there, and they go home tired. And sometimes even more tired than when they came. Now there's something wrong with that picture. Number one, if Franciscans, we can be tired from the work, but spiritually we should be energized if we're living this covenant. If we've been liberated and living this covenant, we should be energized for life. When we come to fraternities, it should be a great moment to share life together. Same thing for us brothers, by the way, and for the sisters. Because sometimes we come, one more meeting, we finish, no, that's eat. Always have food around. That'll bring at least some energy if we do something together. But so for this whole notion of fraternity, and in your last general chapter, you struggled a lot. This was something that was brought up again. Do not allow your meetings to be reduced to some devotion and just some tired, worn-out thing. Those should be moments where you are really being energized, where you are re-identifying together. We are in this together. We're going somewhere. We're not, I can't do it again. And there's no age with this, by the way. I tell you, there's a fascinating, well, it's curious. He's a friend, a very close friend. He's 90, he'll be 91 January 15th. He runs 5 international pilgrimages a year. And when I walk with him, much like walking with someone else here, I'm not going to say his name, Raymond, but he's got more energy than the, I don't know if you know, what's in the Americas, we've got this little bunny that's running on Duracell with batteries, you know, going very fast. Rabbit, it's a rabbit, that's going, it never seems to run out of juice. That's this guy. And why does he run out of juice? He's 90, he's going to be 91. It's not because of his age, because of his thinking. He is always thinking about how he has been liberated. He's thinking about the covenant relationship that he's made through his profession, and he loves fraternity, he loves life, and so he's always thinking what's next. I mean, where's everybody else off? It's wonderful. He goes to a meeting, say, oh, let me get a little bit of that energy, let me plug in, you know, let's plug in a little bit, get some of that juice from him, because my gosh, he's got more energy. This is what God's liberation covenant should do for us in fraternity. So we celebrate this memorial, we celebrate this memoriality. Why? So that we might re-identify ourselves as brothers and sisters, our common life together, our common identity together. And that, when we recognize that, it simplifies things. It simplifies our relationships, it simplifies our life, because we have a sense of our deepest values, what really matters. If we have those, then other things get simpler somehow. This notion of family, I think it's really important to keep in mind. Why we are not a biological family, but the values of family, we don't choose those people by nature, we choose them because of our willing to do so, because we recognize something in brothers and sisters in our fraternities, and we want them to be part of their lives, we want them to be part of our lives. So it goes beyond the monthly or how often you meet as fraternities. It goes telephone calls, supporting each other, visiting each other, helping each other outside of those monthly times when we can spend more time together. The theme of reconciliation within our fraternities, and reconciliation, each of our fraternities should be a healing, reconciling fraternity. So when someone comes, they should be able to say, I found peace. I found a better sense of myself. I'm going to give you an example. I was in Istanbul two weeks ago for a conference, for a meeting, for formation of Franciscan family for dialogue. There was a young man at the Mass on Sunday he didn't participate in the Eucharist. They asked me to resign. I noticed that. As I was going out, I shook his hand, and I asked him, who was he? He says, I'm a Muslim. I said, oh. See, I like to come here. He said, because when I come here, I experience peace. That's what Franciscan fraternity should be able to, that's what we should be able to do with each other. When we come together, part of the reason why we want to get together is so we can experience peace. So we can renew that chance of being healed, being forgiven together. And then prayer together, obviously, remind ourselves that we belong to God, all of us, and everything belongs to God. And then peace. You have the only rule that I'm aware of that prohibits you explicitly from taking up arms. You know that, right? That was in that 1221 rule. You could not. Now that was not Francis, probably. That rule was probably not written, inspired by Francis, but not written by him. Probably written by Hubert Eaton and by some canonists. But you are the only rule that I know of that states you cannot take up arms under any circumstance. Under any circumstance. That's written in your primitive rule. I found that's fascinating. I think it's very interesting. You need to think of it. And so, what does that say about something? You know, it's, by the way, that traces its tradition back to St. Ambrose in the 4th century. So St. Ambrose, living at a time when already they had entered into the Roman Empire, Constantine had already converted the whole Christian, whole world under his aegis to Christianity. But there, all citizens were required, when necessary, to take up arms to defend the nation. And St. Ambrose says, we can't. In fact, we've been baptized, any baptized Christian baptized into Christ has no right to bear arms, to take up arms. No right to do that. In fact, it's prohibited in his understanding of the gospel. Which means that's why we have two traditions in the Catholic Church. We have what we usually call the just war tradition, which emerged mostly out of St. Augustine and later on developed by St. Thomas. But we have a peace tradition as well, which isn't talked about very much. But Francis tied into the peace tradition. Not at the beginning of his life, as Raymond wrote in one of his articles, when he was going to war earlier. But as he experienced war, he saw how it dehumanizes everyone and everything. It degrades everything, including the natural environment. And so Francis came to the conclusion that he didn't write it, it's never stated clearly, he cannot bear arms. But Francis himself offered another approach. After having practiced the war a few times and saw what it did to his own life, and what it did to the people around him, probably lost some friends in the war, in Perugia at least, probably. But in any case, so the whole point of it is what I'm going to say about peace is it's critical in your rule that you have that special indication. So what does your rule say? It talks about the centrality of God. It talks about the dignity, the respect, the care for each and every human person, including in the fraternity. And maybe start there. Sometimes when we get angry with each other, we lose the face that that's God sitting next to me, that's Jesus sitting next to me, that's God's presence, God's created beauty next to me. It makes me angry sometimes. Then the unity of all of life and creation, which is what Laudato Si is all about, Pope Francis. He's picking up on something of St. Francis in the life of Francis and in the Canticle of Francis, this unity. And death is a new beginning. So death is not the end of things. It's a new opportunity for this communion, the centrality of God. Are you still with me? I can put you to sleep here, right? So, the other thing that's interesting about these rules that we're celebrating now is Francis and the early brothers, and also then later on after 1221 with the brothers and sisters, and Clare had a different argument, a bone to pick with the church. Francis and the brothers, it was like they practiced the gospel. And when you practice something, does anyone play an instrument? Anyone ever tried to learn an instrument, to play an instrument? Like a violin or a guitar or a piano? Has anyone ever tried? Do you know how, anyone who has, see how many hours it takes to finally begin to think that this first begin to think you're getting good? Then your teacher makes you realize, well, you got a few more hours to go, a few more weeks, a few more months. And then you have to keep kind of practice and keep going at this. This is how Francis and the other brothers saw their lives. When you practice the gospel, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall and have to get back up again. When you practice the gospel, write down that which works and try to forget that which doesn't work. And if you don't want to forget, then go to the admonitions of Francis. There he'll remind you that which does not work. The admonitions are kind of a parallel book that explain trial and error, the things that did not work so well, and what happens when those things don't work well. One particular admonition talks about money and how it corrupts the soul, how it corrupts relationships, for example. The admonitions can be read in parallel with the rule 1221 or 1223. But speaking of the regular Malat, so for the OFMs, the first order people, those Capuchins, provincials, you are, the rule of life of the Brothers Ministry, you observe the Holy Gospel. Who else has to do that? Secular Franciscans. Who else has to do it? The Four Clares. So something about the inspiration of Francis with all of these rules is that, and with Clare, is that the Gospel is at the center of everything. The Gospel, who is Jesus? It's interesting because in Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis talks about this trilogy of relationship with Jesus. That was something echoed by Benedict XVI. That if you want to come to understand your faith, it's relational first. So everything in Franciscan world is relational. Relationship with God, relationship with each other, relationship with ourselves, relationship with all of creation. Interconnectedness is what's the word that Pope Francis will go on to use when he talks about integral ecology. And for us, living in obedience without property and in chastity. So, very interesting. There's a Franciscan who has he's 81 years old now. He was from a former historic province of the United States. Now the new province that all of us belong to, almost all of us in the United States belong to a new province as of October 17th of this year. He says that St. Francis of Assisi was a master of making room for the new and letting go of that which was tired or empty. Francis did not want to embrace the other rules, the Benedictine rule, the Augustinian rule. He found those to be tired and empty for him. For the Benedictines and the Augustinians, it wasn't for them, but for him. His first biography describes Francis as hopeful, always new, always beginning anew. Let us begin. Much of Francis's genius was that he was ready for absolute newness from God, something totally undescribable, something unimaginable, meeting with the leper. Unimaginable, going to meet with a sultan. Unimaginable. And from nowhere, therefore, could also trust fresh and new ideas, attitudes about himself. His God was not tired, so he was never tired. His God was not old, so Francis remained young. That, I think, is very important to keep in mind and when we think about the celebrations that we're going through these days. Now, there are not. Many interpretations can be given. I like to think of it as a convergence of several things. Liberation, covenant, prophetic engagement. Now, let's talk a little bit about liberation. Francis, this happens in 1224. In 1219, 1220, Francis is off somewhere outside of Italy. He's in Damietta, in Egypt, probably parts of Syria, then eventually gets back home in 1220, probably by June of 1220. What happens in the fall of 1220? There's a chapter, Francis quits. He leaves as being minister and servant of the order. Why did he leave? Why do you think Francis stopped being minister? Raymond, any ideas? Or John? Why Francis stopped being minister? Or anyone else? Anyone? Well, I'll give you, no, please. You starting to say something? Oh, okay, all right, so there are several different interpretations. One is that he was tired. He was tired of the fact that the brothers no longer wanted to live on the edge. They were starting to get comfortable. They started to get larger houses, started to get more security. And then for Francis, this was not something that was going to be good. It was not going to liberate the friars. It was going to enslave them, he feared. And he was tired of them complaining among themselves about how rough he was. Always too demanding, always asking too much of them. He's probably tired also of the brothers who were pushing him to get something stable, more formalized. It wasn't enough to live by the inspiration, by the Holy Spirit he talked about, and Thomas of Celano tells us over and over again, Francis sought to live by the Holy Spirit, who Francis considered to be the true minister general of the order. It's still true today, although sometimes we forget. So, this Francis is worn out, he's tired. Physically, he's exhausted too, by the way, because he's been not good to himself physically, but also all of these travels, he's picked up different illnesses along the way. And probably, it looks like, it's now pretty much confirmed, since they've exhumed the body 2 times to look at it, to study it, he had a form of leprosy, Hansen's disease, some form. Tuberculoid, it was called tuberculoid leprosy. So that was all. He also suffered from, probably from bouts of malaria. Yes or no from central Italy, because the story's not exactly clear from Assisi how at different times malaria affected people more adversely, but because of his travels. He probably picked up in other parts of Italy, malaria is more prominent, and he probably picked up malaria from there, and over time. Malaria, by the way, is not debilitating in and of itself necessarily, but it stays in your blood for 10 years. If you get reinfected each time, it makes you weaker in different ways as an effect. And then other of the waterborne diseases, things that he picked up in the prison as well, already from the time when he was in prison. So, you've got Francis coming to La Verna. He's exhausted, probably a bit tired spiritually, a bit demoralized, and this is where you get into 2 interpretations. One interpretation, like several of the biographers, Celano included, is that Francis goes to La Verna, as was his custom, to celebrate the feast of St. Michael. In preparation for that, he goes on fasting and prayer. Never alone, by the way. You can see in the picture, there's somebody sitting there watching this, one of the brothers. Because Francis never goes anywhere without the brothers. Goes back to the central theme about the OFS, fraternity. Nothing, God desires that things happen when we are together. And God can work on us individually. But Franciscan vision is 2 by 2, minimum, or 3 by 3, or 4 by 4. This is who we are. However, we live in a world of individualism today. So what does the fraternity idea have to say about how we're living with each other, how we're living our lives today? Are we living it more as individuals, Friars Minor as well? Or are we really connected to fraternity and allowing fraternity to shape our identities, shape our sense of relationship with God, with all the world, shape our mission? And so this, I think, is really important. So this is a new moment, again, just like in the Old Testament, that we read, God creates goodness, humanity messes it up. Humanity suffers for a while, God creates new goodness together with creation. Humanity goes along for a while and messes it up again. God comes back again. God doesn't destroy anyone who messes up. God looks for a new way to sneak around, come through the window, through the door, however, to try to get back into our hearts and our lives and lift us back up again, because we keep pushing ourselves down, pushing each other down, pushing creation down. God says, no, we're going to find another way. This is what God does. Is Francis understood this. Francis gets to La Verna. According to Celano, Francis gets rewarded because of his closeness, his unmistakable love of God, and his closeness to Jesus. He begins to bear the wounds outwardly, that which he lives internally. That's one interpretation. I have another one, and it could be totally wrong, but it's mine. And all of us should come up with some theories for ourselves about Franciscan life, because it will shape the way we see things and how we live our Franciscan vocation. When we have an idea ourselves that we've shaped over time, and allow that then to lead us, and maybe have to make corrections along the way. My interpretation is based, as I said, Francis goes, he's exhausted. He goes with several trusted brothers who probably also want to live still the rugged life, the rugged gospel life that he professed. That's why he surrounds himself with those early brothers. And you're going to try to stick to something. Don't get the people who aren't sticking to it to go with you, because sooner or later you will either get worn down or they're just going to run away and you're going to be left alone. So take your trusted friends with you and let them encourage you, because they're going to keep saying yes, yes, yes. Even if they're saying he's running, he's worried, he's going to wear himself out this way, but we're going to go with him and wear ourselves down together. Francis goes. I think that the experience of Laverna was again a new liberation for him. He had to say, I have to let go. I'm accumulating the sense of responsibility for the brothers. I've got my idea of what the order is supposed to look like in the movement. They've got people coming after me, what it's supposed to look like. I've got my idea that I'm imposing on everyone else. Maybe God's telling me I have to relax. I have to let God return to the center of this movement and get me out of it, get me out of the way. I think Francis goes there. I think God says, so many times you keep doubting me, you doubt whether I'm with you. I'm going to give you something that you're never going to be able to forget. I'm going to give you a sign that you will, an indelible sign that you're not going to forget. When you look down, when you go to sleep, when you wake up, you're going to think of me, and you're going to have to realize you have to keep trusting me. That, I think, maybe that's the interpretation of where I am now. And it's interesting, because if anybody ever heard of Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta? Has anyone ever heard of her? So you probably remember there was a book that was published about her own internal writings. And in those writings, she talks about her own dark, deep night of the soul, where she even says, at some point, I don't think God exists. How could God forget me, forget these people who are suffering so much? Now those are not signs of infidelity. They're signs of a deep relationship with God, I think. What they might look like from the outside would look like she's ready to abandon and give up. So the celebration, I think, the covenant is renewed again with Francis. And when he leaves Laverna, he's not showing everybody, look at me. All of a sudden he's hiding whatever happened. That's what his early brothers said afterwards, after his death. They said, we knew, we saw, he told us we couldn't say he's hiding, but that's because it's not about him, it's about God. And that's what he wanted to keep the focus on. St. John Paul II went in 1993, he goes to Laverna, and there he prays. Remember, was it 1991? What happened to John Paul II? Does anybody remember what happened to him? Somebody shot him. What did he do when he finally got out of the hospital and was able to get strong enough that sometime after that, what did he do? He went to the prison in Rome and he forgave the person who shot him. This whole thing about the power of forgiveness. That was an act of liberation. He didn't do it for the other person. He did it for himself. But most of the time, when we keep holding back from giving freedom to someone, from liberating someone that we hold in our lives, we are the prisoners, not them. You know what I'm talking about. Anyone who think in your lives, think about anyone you're holding in bad place right now, in your prison. John Paul II, we can't hold anybody in prison. We have to let them go because we're the ones in prison. We think they are. Oh, St. Francis, stigmatized on Laverna, the world longs for you. Read it with me if you can. That icon of the crucified Jesus, it needs your heart, open to God and to Christ, of your bare wounded feet, of your pierced and wounded hands. The world longs for your prayer, strong in the power of the gospel. Help Francis, the people to today to recognize the evil of sin and to seek its purification and rest. Crucified humanity today. This is where I think Laverna and today need to keep in mind. We need to see what's happening in the world today. If you see that the boat people, you know about those people who are escaping from, they're running from places where they can no longer live, wars, starvation, other types of conflicts, or just poverty. symbol of children in Africa starving. The bottom side, the current war that's taking place in Palestine, Israel. Ukraine, in South America and parts of South America, people's human rights are being denied by their governments. Call for peace everywhere. The Eucharist in the middle. Do this in memory of me. When we do the Eucharist, it is an act of willfulness. We're saying that we reaffirm the covenant, we accept the liberation, but we also accept the responsibility. The church's ritual of remembering our salvation in Christ, not only to inspire, but to demand action in the world. And so at the end of the Mass, what are the last words that are said? Go in peace, or go in the peace of Christ. That is a symbol for us to carry the peace of the world. That's a demand. When we've celebrated the remembrance of me, it's Jesus saying, now I've given you everything you need again, go. So, prophetic memory, justing, healing the world. Do this in memory of me. This is the stigmata of our world today, of which St. John Paul II spoke. St. Francis would call us to mind. We can't stand by and simply watch these events take place. We are part. This is God's people. It is part of our family. These are our brothers and sisters. This is our world fraternity, including all of creation, wounded as it is by all that we are doing to it. Gretchen, 1224. Convergence of liberation, covenant, and prophecy there. Finally, the day of joy is drawn near. The time of exaltation has come. Many different places, people gathered. Hundreds, they say hundreds, and I've heard a couple thousand. It was a huge throng of people from all over the Rieti Valley came and assembled that night. And they were celebrating. Torches lit. Finally, the holy man of God, Francis, came, finding everything prepared, and he saw them and was glad. And they celebrate together. Great show. Interesting in that narration from Shimano, it's not just human beings who are celebrating Jesus, really alive and present in Gretchen. It wasn't just a part of a memory trip. This was Jesus coming in the act. It's like Eucharist. Jesus came and was present to Francis, to all those who were gathered on that holy mountain. And it's interesting because therefore the forests amplify the cries, the boulders scream out with joyful. Even the nature was singing together with humanity, with the delight of God in the manger, filling the hearts of everyone present. We move on to the Canticle of the Creatures, 1225, finished in 1226 with the death of Francis. Had Francis lived a little longer, there might have even been a few more verses. Who knows? Remember, performance. Francis performs everything. So what we have are written down words, but the words were never read. They were sung. Because Francis, when you sing, you're actually different, creates a different experience when you sing. I don't know if there are singers in our midst, but when we sing, it creates a different feeling in us than you simply reading the word. There's a piece of us that is pulled open, if you will, kind of open wider as we enter into the song of giving praise to God. And so the Canticle of the Creatures, our song, starts with, and it's very interesting, the first 9 verses of the Canticle, not one mention of human beings. Human beings don't even figure it. Isn't that interesting? Verse 10 and 11, when the human beings enter in, it's because they've sinned, they've broken covenant, they're no longer free, and they're living unjustly with each other toward the created members. What's interesting in the Canticle, you've got this breakdown. So next time you read it, just take verses 1 to 9 and look, let me know if you find some human person in there. You won't, but I'd be interested to see if you could. Something else about the Canticle, no mention of explicitly of Christ. It is God, the God creator. Now we understand the Trinity is in Francis's thinking, so he didn't have to make explicit everywhere, but just about every other prayer, Jesus is mentioned, except in this prayer. Just interesting to note that. I'm not trying to suggest, because who knows, we don't have any, Jesus didn't say, oh, I just imply the Trinity's there, or think about it, but this whole thing about Most High, all-powerful, good Lord, and then giving praise to the Creator for everything that God has done. None of us worthy to pronounce God's name. This is also very biblical, as Roman will tell us. In Jewish tradition, you can never pronounce God's name. Hashem, Adonai, different names, not the attributes of God, which takes us to the prayer that Francis talks about, the praises of God. You can never mention God's name explicitly because we're not worthy to do so. Praise be you, all you creatures, especially Sir, brother, son, and sister Moon. There's no other piece of literature prior to this that talks about creatures being referred to as brothers and sisters. I'm sure you've already had this in your classes, you know, so I'm not going to go into detail, but it's interesting that in this sung poem of Francis, this prayer, spirit prayer of Francis, it's all about relationship. Everything is related in God. Everything becomes brother and sister. Laudato si. Well, Francis insists on this too. We should not be surprised, and we should just put on our seatbelts with Laudato si, because where it wants to take us is someplace we're not yet ready to go, most of us. Because we have to rethink everything, our relationship with God. So let's just keep in mind the Canticle of the Creatures. The Canticle of the Creatures is kind of like it's probably been singing in Francis's heart over many years. And it's a summation of everything that's gone before. The Canticle of the Creatures needs to be understood. It is that journey from Francis's earliest recollection that God has some new plan for his life through all the experiences that take place, ending in this summa, kind of bringing everything together, if you will. More of the canticle, praise be you, my Lord, through Sister Moon. He goes on, talks about the usefulness of all the creatures. The creatures are not, by the way, in Francis's, this is something different than our mentality, I'm saying our mentality in general, in the last several hundred years. Our mentality is things are good as they are useful, even human beings. And if they're not useful, they're less good, which is the argument in Laudato Si as well. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. Things are good as they are useful to us. If they're not useful to us, then they're less good. It's a utilitarian approach to things. And St. Francis and Pope Francis picks it up clearly in his Laudato Si, says no, each thing, because it has been created by God, has intrinsic goodness, dignity, value. And so, Laudato Si, the Canticle of the Creatures and Laudato Si will converge together in 2025, and it's beyond the devotion and bird baths. Anybody ever seen the bird baths with Francis? Have you ever seen those bird baths that people put in their gardens? Francis, and you got a little water there, and the birds are supposed to come and drink. That's one devotion, and one of the devotion approach, but this had nothing to do really with what Francis was calling us to. He was calling us to a prophetic action in his life, I think, which is symbolized in those, what I taught on the one side. If you look at Laudato Si and look to the left, you'll see the images of Francis and from the Canticle of the Creatures. And if you look on the other side, you'll see Laudato Si is pointing to what we've done to the planet, how we've broken covenant with the planet, and the destruction we've done to the oceans, the seas, to the rainforests, to the air, and the impact that's having. And we're being called back again to renew the covenant that we've made with God as Franciscans. We're almost there. This is from Laudato Si, I believe. John, could you read that for us, please?
I believe that St. Francis is the example by excellence of care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology, lived out joyfully and unattemptedly. He is the patron saint of all who study and work in the area of he is also much loved by non-Christians.
That's good right there. He's also much loved by non-Christians. Yeah, go to Muslim countries, talk about, especially if they've had any experience with Franciscans, and what you'll find there is, it'll blow your mind. I went to Syria in 2017. Went to Aleppo, from Damascus to Aleppo. I was born in the United States, but I have an Irish passport as well. Thank God I left my American passport at home, and my Irish passport only to get into the country of Syria, because Syria and the United States. And in fact, on the way back from Aleppo, while I was there, the United States bombed Homs, a military air base, and we drove through Homs 7 hours after the bombing. How did we get through? How do we get into Syria without any difficulty? How do we get around Syria and get back out? Franciscan, St. Francis. Muslims there, we traveled through checkpoints with Hamas, other checkpoints was Hezbollah, and they looked and said, the friars, you go. Because we were seen as people who did not favor anyone. We were seen as people who recognized the dignity. We were serving in the war. We were serving more Muslims than Christians, really, because there were many more good Muslims and Christians there, and they were needing that, and they recognized that. So this thing about love by non-Christians, love by non-Christians when we live the covenant, when we live the values, when we are fraternity to brothers and sisters of the world on to see, then the world will recognize us. The harmony will come through, and the justice of God with a poor society, it will get interior peace. So, something else which I think from Laudato Si, Mary, the mother who cared for Jesus, now cares maternal affection and pain for the wounded world. Her pierced heart mourned the death of Jesus. She grieves for the sufferings of the poor crucified of today, the creatures also crucified, laid waste by human power. This is the celebration of the Lavana today for our world. And so, the final event is the Transitus of Brother Francis in 1226, which we will celebrate in a little more than 3 years from now. Again, I want to point back to the liberation, the covenant, the prophetic life, the communion with all creation for Francis. We see that beginning with his encounter with the leper, the different members who joined along the route, the encounter with the Sultan Francis of Damietta, it's San Damiano, Francis receiving the stigmata, the rules of life that Francis given to him by God, and then eventually leading to the creation of the captive world creatures as kind of a summary of everything. It is a summary of Francis's vision for what he thinks God sees for the future of the world. So it's about the future, it's prophetic, and it's about communion with all of creation. It's what is called a dangerous memory. Why do I say dangerous memory? Because people who don't want to hear it don't want to hear it. It's like the message of Jesus, a dangerous memory, because what it calls for, the type of conditions for life and relationship that it calls for, some people in power will not want this. Economic power, political power, other forms will not want this to go forward. And so this is Francis. We celebrate 1226, his death, but as I said earlier, it really is Francis then, as he's departing, he gives us his testament. He leaves us with the words of encouragement. Do not forget who you are. Do not forget what you have been called to. You are people who have been liberated. You've been called into covenant. You're called to be prophetic in the world today. And the result of all that will be shalom, will be this communion with all creatures, all of creation. And that's what I'd like to say. This is what I think the meaning of the celebrations should be for us. So we're going to take a pause, I think, about what's the next step? John, William, somebody? I don't have it. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Anyway.